Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to get into something that's been puzzling a lot of political strategists.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
How can the Democrats win back the working class vote here in America? It seems like every election cycle, this question pops up.
It definitely does.
We're going to try to get to the bottom of it today
Yeah.
using this piece, Rebounding against the MAGA loss, to see if we can figure out, what went wrong.
Right.
And more importantly, how to maybe turn things around.
Mm-hmm.
So by the end of this, hopefully, you'll understand why this shift happened in the first place
Okay.
and have some concrete strategies for what Democrats can do to reverse it. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, I think what's really interesting about this source is that it goes beyond just the analysis. It actually offers some real actionable steps. It's not just about understanding the past.
Right.
It's about looking ahead.
It's not just an oops, we messed up kind of thing.
Exactly.
So, all right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. The working class, which, once upon a time was a core part of the Democratic base, has really shifted towards the Republican Party and the MAGA movement specifically. This wasn't just some small blip either.
Yeah,
This was a major factor in the 2016 and 2020 elections.
absolutely. And I think what's important to remember is that this wasn't like an overnight thing. There were these underlying trends that maybe weren't addressed as effectively as they could have been.
Gotcha.
And the source really breaks it down into three main reasons. And the first one is something that really hits right at the heart of a lot of these working class communities.
Okay.
Economic dislocation.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, we've all seen this happening, right? The decline of American manufacturing, the rise of outsourcing, and then
Yeah.
even further, you've got automation coming in
Mm-hmm.
and changing the game entirely.
Right. And it's not just the reality of the situation, it's also how it was perceived. Some of those working class voters felt like the Democrats weren't doing enough to protect their jobs. They saw trade deals as prioritizing corporations over American workers.
Okay.
And then on the flip side, you had Trump coming in with this bring back manufacturing message. Even if it was more symbolic than anything, it really resonated.
Sure.
It tapped into this very real feeling of being left behind.
It's a good reminder that it's not just about policy, right? It's about messaging too. You can have the best policies in the world, the most
Yes.
well-intentioned policies.
Exactly.
But if you don't communicate that effectively, if you don't connect with voters on an emotional level,
Yeah.
you're going to struggle.
Totally agree. And that leads us right into that second reason that the source highlights, cultural alienation.
Okay.
Now, this is where things get really interesting, especially for those of us who live in more urban areas. A lot of working class Americans, particularly in rural communities, started to feel like the Democratic Party was out of touch with their values, their way of life.
So while the Democratic Party was focusing on important progressive issues,
Right.
did they miss the mark on making those issues connect
Hmm.
with a big chunk of the population that was already feeling economically squeezed?
I think that's the argument the source is making. It's not that those progressive issues weren't important,
Sure.
but maybe the way they were presented didn't connect with the everyday concerns of many working class voters.
Okay.
And then you had Trump coming in with this blunt style, this anti-establishment rhetoric,
Yeah.
really appealed to people who felt ignored, even looked down upon by the elites.
It's almost like the perfect storm brewing then.
It is.
Economic anxiety, cultural alienation, and then enter stage, right?
Yeah.
Factor number 3, anti-elite populism.
Yes, and this is where Trump's background as this outsider businessman really played to his advantage. He wasn't a career politician, so he could really tap into that deep frustration that people felt with the status quo, with the way things were being done in Washington.
He really positioned himself as the champion of the forgotten man, right?
Right.
Someone who understood their struggles,
Absolutely.
someone who's going to shake things up.
Yeah.
And that was a really powerful message, I think, for people who felt like the system had failed them.
Yeah, it was a way to channel all that frustration, that anger, into a political movement. And it clearly resonated, especially in those places that had been hit hardest by these economic shifts, and felt culturally disconnected from the direction the country was headed.
So we've got this potent mix of economic anxiety, cultural disconnect, and then a leader who's tapping into that anti-establishment sentiment. No wonder there was this shift
Right.
towards the MAGA movement.
Right. And now the question becomes, what can you do to address these underlying issues?
Right.
To bridge that gap. Because writing off a whole segment of the population isn't really a viable strategy, especially in a democracy where every vote counts.
Well, let's shift gears then. Let's talk about the how. What does this piece actually suggest that Democrats can do to win back these voters?
Well, I think it really boils down to, like, concrete action, not just talk, but clear messaging that resonates with those lived experiences of the working class,
Okay.
and a genuine commitment to actually fighting for their needs.
I'm all for less talk and more action. So let's get into it. What's the first strategy?
All right, well, it's a familiar phrase, but with a bit of a twist. Economic populism. And we're not talking about just empty slogans here.
Huh?
We're talking about tangible solutions that create jobs, that create opportunities, specifically for the working class.
That sounds great in theory, but how do you actually make that happen in practice? What are we talking about here?
Well, the source starts with something that used to have bipartisan support, massive investment in infrastructure.
Infrastructure, okay.
So think roads, bridges, public transit systems that actually work, a modernized energy grid that can handle the demands of the 21st century.
Okay, yeah, I see the economic angle there, right?
Yeah.
Big projects, lots of jobs. But is it just about creating any kind of jobs?
Well, that's where the populism part comes in. The source really emphasizes that these need to be good-paying union jobs, jobs that provide a path to the middle class, jobs that offer benefits, security,
Okay.
not just these temporary gigs.
So it's not about stimulating the economy in a general sense.
Right.
It's about making sure that those benefits go directly to the working class.
Exactly.
They're the ones who see those gains, not just corporations or the wealthy.
It's about showing those communities that Democrats are fighting for them, for their economic well-being, not just paying lip service. And it's not just about immediate relief either. It's about laying the foundation for long-term growth,
Yeah.
especially in those areas that have been hardest hit by the economic shifts we talked about.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah.
This feels like a proactive, forward-looking approach.
Yeah.
What else does this economic populism strategy entail?
Well, remember the Green New Deal?
Oh.
The source actually suggests a little reframing of that to make it more appealing to working-class voters.
Now, that's interesting. I'm really curious to hear how they propose doing that.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, you might think those two things, the Green New Deal and appealing to more conservative working-class voters,
Yeah.
are kind of at odds.
Right, but here's the key. It's all about the framing. Instead of solely focusing on the environmental benefits, Democrats should highlight how the transition to renewable energy can actually create jobs
Okay.
in those traditional energy sectors.
So instead of presenting it as a fight against climate change, it becomes a fight for American jobs, a fight for American workers. Now, that's a message that could resonate a lot more powerfully
Exactly.
with people who might be skeptical of climate action,
Sure.
but who are very, very concerned about their livelihoods.
Exactly. It's about finding that common ground, that shared interest. It's about ensuring that workers in those industries, like coal, oil, and natural gas,
Right.
that they're not left behind in this transition to a green economy.
I can see how that reframing could really bridge the gap.
Yeah.
Right. It addresses those economic anxieties
Mm-hmm.
while still moving forward on a progressive agenda.
Yeah.
That's smart. What else is in this economic populism toolkit?
Well, the source also mentions these Buy American initiatives, which encourage the purchase of U.S.-made products.
Okay.
Now, that's not a new idea,
Right.
but they take it a step further.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
They argue that the U.S. needs to make significant investments in bolstering domestic manufacturing,
Why?
especially in high-tech sectors.
Yeah.
Things like semiconductors, clean energy technologies,
No.
even robotics.
So it's not just about protecting existing jobs. It's
Mhm.
about creating these new jobs
Exactly.
in the industries of the future.
Mhm.
It's about making sure that American workers have access to those high-paying jobs of tomorrow,
Mhm.
not just the jobs of yesterday.
Right, it's about opportunity.
Yeah.
It's about looking ahead. It's about showing that Democrats are thinking about the long-term economic well-being
Yeah.
of the working class.
Okay, this economic populism strategy is feeling pretty comprehensive.
It is.
I have a feeling, though, that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
You're right about that. We've only scratched the surface of what this source proposes. There's a lot more to unpack when it comes to winning back the working class vote.
All right, well, I'm ready to dive a little deeper. Let's move on to the next strategy.
Okay.
What's next?
So we've been talking about jobs, economic growth, all that. But voters also need to see that you're fighting for their well-being in a tangible way. We're moving from broad economic strategy now into something a little more personal.
Okay, I'm interested to hear where this is going. Let's get into it. So we're talking about like going beyond just those big picture economic things and getting into the nitty-gritty of what makes a difference in people's daily lives.
Exactly. It's about not just telling that Democrats are on the side of working people, not big corporations. This section is called Rebuilding Trust, Fighting for Workers. And it's about those policies that make a real difference in people's lives, day in and day out.
All right, let's talk more action. What kind of policies are we talking about?
Okay, so one of the big ones they highlight is universal paid family leave.
Paid family leave, okay.
Think about it. This would be a game changer for so many working families, especially women who often bear the brunt of caregiving responsibilities.
I can see how that would be huge, yeah.
Yeah?
Provided that support, that financial security, especially during those crucial early months of a child's life.
Right.
Or when a family member is facing a health crisis. It just takes a massive burden off people's shoulders.
It does, and it's not just about families with young children either. It's about caring for aging parents, supporting loved ones with disabilities. It touches so many people's lives.
Right, right. It feels like a policy that speaks to those core values of compassion and fairness that the Democratic Party often champions. But it's also about economic security, isn't it?
Absolutely. When families have access to paid leave, they're less likely to face financial hardship, because of a new baby or a family illness. It allows people to stay connected to the workforce to keep earning a paycheck, which benefits everyone in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting how this one policy can address so many different needs.
Yeah.
Social, economic, and even just, the basic human need for care and support. It seems like a really tangible way to show that Democrats are fighting for the well-being of working families.
It is. And the source doesn't stop there. They also talk about the need to raise the minimum wage.
Okay.
And they're pretty blunt about it.
Okay.
They basically say Democrats need to move beyond the rhetoric
Okay.
and actually get legislation passed that will raise the minimum wage.
Actions speak louder than words, right?
Right.
It's one thing to talk about supporting low-wage workers, but voters want to see results.
Right. They want to see those promises translated into concrete action that puts more money in people's pockets.
Exactly. And it's not just about fairness, although that's a huge part of it. Raising the minimum wage also has these ripple effects throughout the economy.
Right.
When people have more money to spend, they spend it, which stimulates demand, creates more jobs.
So it's not just about helping those at the bottom.
Right.
It's about boosting the entire economy. Okay, so what else does this source suggest in terms of concrete actions, that really demonstrate a commitment to workers?
They talk a lot about strengthening labor unions.
Labor unions, okay.
Now, this is an area where we've seen a significant decline in membership.
Right, especially in the private sector.
Especially in the private sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, that's a trend that's been going on for decades now.
For sure. So I'm curious to hear how they see unions playing a role in this strategy. Because I think for some people, unions might feel like a relic of the past, something that's not really relevant to today's workforce. That's a common perception, but the source argues that revitalizing the labor movement is actually key to reconnecting Democrats with their historical base,
Okay.
the working class. They suggest advocating for stronger labor protections and making it easier for workers to unionize.
So it's about empowering workers,
Yeah.
giving them a voice in the workplace, making sure that they have a seat at the table when it comes to things like wages, benefits, working conditions. It's about restoring that balance of power that's been eroded.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where workers have more bargaining power,
Yeah.
where they can negotiate for fair wages, decent benefits, where they're not just at the mercy of their employers.
I'm seeing how this ties back to that idea of economic populism we were talking about earlier. It's about putting more power in the hands of working people,
Yeah.
both in the marketplace and in the political arena.
Right.
It's about leveling the playing field.
It is. And it's about recognizing the importance of collective action.
Right.
When workers are united, they have a much stronger voice than they do individually. And historically, unions have played a huge role in fighting for things like the minimum wage, workplace safety regulations, paid time off, all those things.
So we've got this trifecta of policy proposals here aimed at directly benefiting working people.
Yeah.
Paid family leave,
Yeah.
raising the minimum wage, strengthening labor unions. That feels like a pretty solid foundation
It is.
for rebuilding trust and demonstrating that Democrats are truly on the side of the working class.
It is, but the source also recognizes that Democrats need to expand their reach beyond those traditional urban strongholds.
Yeah, okay.
They need to reconnect with rural America, a demographic that has increasingly shifted towards the Republican Party.
Now, that's been a major challenge for Democrats in recent elections. How do they suggest tackling this urban-rural divide?
Well, they point to a couple of key areas to focus on. First, addressing the opioid crisis.
Oh, the opioid crisis. That's an issue that's really hit rural communities especially hard. I mean, it's not just a public health crisis, it's an economic crisis, a family crisis. It's a crisis of hope.
It is, and it's something that a lot of people in those rural communities feel has not been adequately addressed by the political establishment. So the source argues that Democrats really need to prioritize public health interventions, improved mental health care, expanded access to addiction recovery services.
So it's about showing those communities that Democrats see them, that they understand the challenges that they're facing, and that they're committed to finding solutions that work.
Exactly. And it's not just about, throwing money at the problem. It's about taking a holistic approach, addressing the root causes of addiction, providing the support that people need to get their lives back on track.
I like how this strategy goes beyond just talking points.
Yeah.
It's about tangible action, about meeting people where they are and offering real help. What else do they suggest in terms of reconnecting with rural America?
They also highlight the importance of improving rural broadband access.
Rural broadband, oh yeah, that's been a huge issue, especially, in the wake of the pandemic, with remote work and online education becoming so essential. Lack of reliable internet access can be a real barrier.
A huge barrier.
To opportunity, to education, to healthcare, to economic development.
Absolutely. It puts those rural communities at a significant disadvantage in today's digital world. So the source argues that Democrats need to champion policies that close that digital divide.
So investing in that infrastructure to bring high-speed internet to every corner of the country.
Exactly.
Making sure that those rural Americans have the same opportunities as their urban counterparts.
Precisely. It's about equity. It's about making sure that everyone, regardless of where they live, has access to the tools and resources they need to thrive in the 21st century.
Okay, so we've covered economic populism, rebuilding trust by fighting for workers, reconnecting with rural America. That's a lot of ground we've covered.
It is.
Is there anything else in this source that Democrats can use to win back those voters?
Those who've drifted towards the MAGA movement, there's one more piece to this puzzle.
Okay.
And it might be the most important one of all.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's not just about specific policies.
Right.
It's about the overall message.
Okay.
The narrative that Democrats are putting forward.
Okay.
They argue that Democrats need to craft a clear, unifying message.
Okay.
That emphasizes hope over division.
So it's about offering a positive vision for the future.
Exactly.
One that brings Americans together instead of driving them further apart.
It's about presenting an alternative to the fear and resentment that has often fueled the MAGA movement.
That's a tall order in today's political climate, which feels so incredibly polarized. How do they propose doing that?
Well, the source outlines 3 key elements of this unifying message. First, emphasizing opportunity for all Americans.
Opportunity for all.
Regardless of background.
So creating a level playing field, ensuring that everyone has a shot at success, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, zip code.
Right.
All those things.
Exactly. It's about returning to those core American ideals of fairness and equality of opportunity. And it's about making it clear that government can play a positive role in enabling that success, not just getting out of the way.
Makes sense. Okay, what's the second element of this unifying message?
It's about offering a clear and compelling vision for the future, one that includes higher wages, affordable health care, access to good jobs, in those growing sectors like clean energy, technology, healthcare, things like that.
So giving voters a roadmap to a better future, right? A tangible sense of what's possible if we work together. Instead of just focusing on what's wrong, it's about painting a picture of what could be right.
Exactly. It's about inspiring hope, about making people believe that a better future is within reach.
And what's the final element of this unifying message?
This one can be a bit tricky, but it's crucial, navigating this whole issue of identity politics.
Identity politics. Yeah, that's a topic that can very easily become divisive. How does this source suggest Democrats approach this?
The key, according to the source, is to strike a balance. Democrats need to make it clear that their policies are designed to help all working-class people, regardless of background.
So finding that common ground, that shared economic struggle, without erasing the unique challenges faced by different groups.
Right. It's about building a coalition that is both diverse and unified, one that recognizes the interconnectedness of our struggles and the need for solidarity.
Wow, this is a lot to take in. We've covered so much ground today.
We have.
From, the reasons behind this working class shift, to the MAGA movement, to the strategies Democrats can employ to win back those voters, it's been a whirlwind tour of American politics.
It has, but it's a crucial conversation to have. And I think this source that we've been discussing offers some really valuable insights, some potential paths forward. It's a roadmap for how Democrats can rebuild trust, reconnect with those working class voters, and offer a vision for a more inclusive and prosperous America.
I agree. And for those of you listening out there, we want to leave you with something to ponder. Given all the strategies we've explored today, what specific policies do you think would be most effective in bringing the working class back into the fold?
It's a question worth considering as we navigate this ever-evolving political landscape. And it's a question that ultimately each of us as citizens needs to answer for ourselves.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating exploration. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. So we're back, ready to wrap up this deep dive into how Democrats can reconnect with the working class. We've gone over why that shift towards the MAGA movement happened, but more importantly, we've looked at what can be done to change things. It's not about dwelling on the past, right?
Right.
It's about finding that path forward.
Yeah, and what I found really encouraging about this source is how much it focuses on action. It's not just this theoretical analysis. It's like, hey, this is a call to action for the Democratic Party. It lays out these concrete steps they can take. Rebuild trust, reconnect with those voters, offer a vision for America that's more inclusive and prosperous.
Exactly. So we talked about economic populism,
Yeah.
policies that actually help working people directly. We talked about how important it is to rebuild trust, to fight for workers' rights, to deal with things like wage stagnation, to make unions stronger. And then there's that urban-rural divide. We've got to bridge that, right? Address the challenges that are unique to rural communities, like the opioid crisis, the lack of broadband access. It's a lot.
It is. It's multifaceted. There's no silver bullet, right?
Right.
It takes a change in policy and in messaging, a willingness to actually listen to those working class voters and offer them solutions that work for them.
And it goes beyond just the economic issues, too. It's about understanding why people feel alienated culturally, why they feel like they're being left behind. That feeling fueled the MAGA movement.
Absolutely.
So we've got to acknowledge those concerns.
Yeah.
And offer a vision for the future that brings people together instead of dividing them further.
It's about opportunity for everyone, a future where everyone has a shot at success, regardless of where they come from or where they live, a future where we work together to solve problems, not tear each other apart.
Okay, so big picture. What are the main takeaways from this deep dive? What should people remember?
Well, first, I think we have to remember that this shift, the working class moving towards the MAGA movement, wasn't just about economics. It was also about this feeling of cultural alienation. People feeling like their values, their way of life weren't being represented anymore by the party that was supposed to be on their side.
Right, that feeling of being unheard, unseen, even looked down on by the, quote-unquote elites.
Yeah.
That disconnect between what the Democratic Party was focusing on and what life was actually like for working class people every single day.
Exactly. The second big takeaway, I think, is that Democrats can win these voters back, but it takes a real commitment. They've got to address the issues, both economic and cultural. They need policies that put working people first, create jobs, raise wages, provide a safety net.
And they have to communicate those policies effectively in a way that resonates with those voters.
Right.
Show up in those rural communities, listen to what people are saying, and offer solutions that actually meet their needs.
Meet people where they are, speak to their hopes, their dreams, offer them a vision for something better that includes them.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. It's a complex issue. But this piece, it gives us a roadmap, actual strategies Democrats can use to reconnect.
A call to action, a challenge to bridge those divides, to build a society where everyone has a chance, a conversation we all need to be part of.
Couldn't agree more. And as we wrap this up, we want to leave you with one last thought. What resonates with you? What policies or strategies do you think would be most effective in bringing the working class back into the fold? Think about it, because it's up to all of us as citizens to shape the future we want. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another one. Until then, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.